Now on the APEC VIP hotline, cutting-edge training for the serious athlete, apecgo.com. Joining us now is the Big 12 insider from Rattle and Hum Sports, Kevin Lonnquist. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm good, Bryan. How are you doing?
Doing very well, thank you very much. What's going on with Big 12 basketball? Is there anybody other than Kansas that we ought to be watching right now?
Didn't I use the phrase with you last week? It's Kansas and 9 other guys named Herb in this conference.
Yeah, I just wondered maybe if things have changed a little bit since then.
No, the Herbs are alive and well. The thing that we're learning about this league, and they're still probably going to get about 4 bids out of the league for the NCAA tournament, in my judgment. Baylor's pretty good. Kansas State's a nice team, and Bill Weber is Bruce Weber, I should say, has done a really nice job of keeping things together for them. And those are like maybe 3 other teams right now that are in seriously pretty good shape at this point to join Kansas in the tournament. Whether or not any of those other 3 teams can get beyond the first weekend, should they get selected, is another story. I mean, the only thing I get concerned about with Kansas is because the gap is so wide between them and the rest of the conference that is this going to impact them when they get to the NCAA tournament? Now, they've won some tight games, of course, on the road, but they've won. They got pushed at Texas before they were able to put that thing away in the final 2 minutes. Same thing at Kansas State on Tuesday when they were pretty much, it was pretty much a 4 or 5 point game for the most part, and they were able to hold off the Wildcats. They always win in Manhattan, it seems, so that's never been an issue there. They've gotten some tests on the road, but the thing is that they found a way to win. Does that make a difference for them making another deep run of the tournament? Time will tell. I mean, obviously they won at Ohio State earlier this year too. But I'm just wondering if the toughness of the league is going to have any kind of negative impact on them once they get there. I don't think so, but you do have to think about it only because the fact that, they always say that your best leagues, grinding through a conference season as deep as like maybe the Big Ten is, will make those teams tougher, and they'll make deeper runs because they know how to fight through challenging games and games that are close and late. But Kansas though is still demonstrating that it's still a far better program than everybody else. And the real pain was the fact that Iowa State lost at Texas Tech on Wednesday. That really hurt the Cyclones.
Yeah, that's not helping them at all. It's amazing to me when you see the shift in football to where a lot of kids now are wanting to go where it's warm and they want to get out of these cold weather places. It's amazing that Kansas has maintained the tradition and the power that they've managed to maintain, even in a conference where a lot of the power is starting to shift, and you see teams leaving. Missouri, their chief rivals, gone, and yet they just keep reloading. And it's one of those things where you just wonder how in the world do they do it up there in the middle of nowhere.
Well, number one, the game's played indoors.
Yeah, well, that helps.
But seriously, it's look at the program. I mean, they're one of the blue bloods of college basketball, along with Duke, UCLA, Indiana, Kentucky, and you can throw in Louisville into that discussion too. But and when you are a blue blood program like Kansas is, you're always going to get your share. I mean, they have won 5 national titles there. They were in the national championship game last year against Kentucky. So the program kind of speaks for itself. And so it's kind of like it's something that's developed over time. This isn't something like where, for instance, like Iowa's program had been good for several years but hasn't reached that ultimate level, and now it's really dropped off here in the last several years because the fact that maybe they're just not competing for the kids. Well, there's no track record behind Iowa's program.
Right.
But there's a great track record behind Kansas's program. So success begets success, and that's why they'll always get their share of great talent year after year.
We talked about Texas last week and their decision to kind of stay away from, going after guys that are one and dones. But at the same time, what do you make of Rick Barnes' program right now?
I think there's obviously in transition here. I think I've kind of made the point that this was probably going to be his last year there, although I'm kind of saying that now with the amount of conviction that I'd like to, because he didn't get him to the tournament last year, which is always kind of the goal, is to get to the NCAA tournament, and then anything can happen once you get there. Now, Texas really had a fight last year to get there, but this year there's just a lot of dysfunctional problems with this team. Just watching them against Oklahoma, they have very few scoring options after Sheldon McClendon. They have they don't take care of the basketball very well. They commit silly, unforced turnovers. You know, we've talked about Mike Kabongo being out until February 23rd with his NCAA suspension, which doesn't help. But there just seems to be no chemistry. And then you've got a war that apparently is building between Barnes and McClendon himself, where he was pulled out of the Iowa State game after playing 1 minute. And then there were some choice comments that apparently Barnes made to the media following the Kansas game. So there just seems to be something going on there where the chemistry, the friction is pretty tough. And I don't think the season is going to end very well. I don't think it's going to cost Barnes his job like I originally thought. I think because the fact that what he's accomplished there is obviously unprecedented in Texas basketball history. And sometimes you have to figure that, well, he should get a pass for 1 year because, look, they did have a down year. Of course, the criticism for Barnes would be, well, you know, he's recruited a bunch of talent and he's never gotten them to multiple Final Fours, with the exception of the one where they lost to Carmelo Anthony in Syracuse about 10 years ago. And so I think that it's a bad year. It's going to be a bad year for them. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if they finished under 500. They're already off to an unprecedented 0-5 start in the Big 12. They got Tech tomorrow, which they need to win. My gosh, Tech has as many wins as Oklahoma State does in the conference, which just kind of throws you off whack there for a second. But nonetheless, I really think that it's going to be a situation where it's just going to be a bad year. Texas is probably going to finish with maybe 4 or 5 conference wins if this keeps going like it is. And they're just going to have to chalk it off to a bad year, and hopefully they'll get it going in the right direction next year.
All right, Shipton, I did want to ask your opinion. You know, the stuff came down about the NCAA earlier this week, getting some big time egg on its face when it was found that they basically broke their own rules when it came to investigating Miami. And we've seen some programs get hammered pretty good in the Big 12. Baylor's basketball program has been in the NCAA doghouse more than once.
Right.
You know, Oklahoma's football program has been in the NCAA doghouse at times. And what do you make of this stuff with the NCAA now and their enforcement group basically breaking the rules to get information about a school? And what do you think ought to happen here?
Well, I think it might prove that Miami might get out of this.
Can you imagine that?
Well, and as bad as it really sounds when those initial reports came out about this, but the fact that the NCAA, you know, the enforcement committee acquired this information improperly, and of course all of the heavy critics of the NCAA are about it, just in unison. You could have heard them miles away saying, "Ha, told you so," and saying, "See, these guys are not above reproach anyway." And of course, you know, the NCAA has been always criticized for being one of the most hypocritical organizations known to man, and they did themselves no favor. But I do think that this is a good thing from the NCAA's credibility standard when Mark Emmert said, "Look, we have to govern ourselves by the same rules here, because, you know, for us to tell Miami or any other program that you are improperly doing X, Y, and Z, when we can't even keep our own house in order, sets a bad precedent, and then their credibility's on the line." And remember, Mark Emmert came in here with the idea that he was going to bring revolutionary change to it, you know, consolidating the rules book. I mean, they just had the meeting last week in Grapevine where they basically gave free rein to college football coaches to electronically contact kids. Remember, they did that the summer before, this past summer, with the basketball coaches, and they did it right now for the football coaches, and allowing now all 10 of their football coaches to recruit. So this is kind of like maybe that period of change, growth, pain for the NCAA in terms of, you know, evolving and becoming more modern, if you will, and changing with the times. And there's always going to be that period where they just go through some bad things where it doesn't look very good, but hopefully on the other side of this, they'll look a lot better on this. And obviously, if Miami becomes the beneficiary because of their mistakes, then that's not, you know, while Miami can obviously perceive to be extremely guilty, you know, the way the NCAA can do it now, it's going to be really hard for the NCAA to try and come down on them as hard based on the way this all came down this week.
I'm going to ask a drastic question here because one of the things that we brought up here on the show in the last week is that many times with the NCAA now they say that anything that goes on in the program, the head coach is responsible. He should know, and if he doesn't know, that's his problem. But he's going to be held responsible and accountable for the misdeeds in his program. So that being said, does this mean Mark Emmert needs to step down?
I don't think so. At least I would hope not, because I have a good vibe on Emmert, and I think what he's trying to do is try and get their own act in order. I would hope it would not lead to his leaving. I think that he'll probably, I think that he will probably take a lot of fair share of criticism on this, and he'll kind of have to lay low for a while. But I would hope not, given what he's trying to do to restore some credibility to the NCAA. This is the one period, even though I said a moment ago where everyone considers the NCAA as hypocritical as it is, this is probably the one period where the NCAA has a chance to kind of restore some integrity with all of its membership and nationally. And like I said a moment ago, there's going to be some problems as they go through this, and this is just one of those issues there. Again, I hope that it doesn't lead to Mark's stepping down or being asked to step down. But I'll say this: there's more investigations going on. There's still one at Auburn. I think there's still some fallout at Ohio State that they're looking at too. So you got to so if it's continuing to find that this pattern of rules enforcement continues or acquisition of information, if that surfaces in other specters, then maybe the case can be made to Emmert to step down.
You think SMU's enjoying this right now?
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, other than the fact that, it's about 25 years too late for them.
Yeah.
Other than the fact that, the funny thing about that is, of course, I had just gotten to school there when the enforcement came down. I was there the 2 years. I was on campus the 2 years they didn't play. But I can tell you this, that based on everything that I had heard, there's a lot of sore SMU fans that are about this whole thing. Mm-hmm. But really, I mean, as blatant as SMU was, and there were a lot of finger pointing at Texas because Texas may have turned them in because they had this unfair advantage or whatever. Of course, we all know back in those days, Bryan, how blatant the cheating was from all parts of the Southwest Conference. But, in my opinion, and again, I'm probably the wrong guy to ask because I wasn't there when all this was going down in the early to mid-'80s, but I can say that, if that was the enforcement at the time, then SMU kind of brought it on itself.
Sure.
And so now they just have to move on from it. Now, as I've also told people, there were two types of death penalties that SMU went through. There was the one that the NCAA went through, and then there was the one that the president who was there when I started, A. Kenneth Pye, who made it even more punitive for SMU to be competitive in athletics. And that's where SMU is really feeling the effects of it, in my judgment, because of how hard those recruiting restrictions were. I mean, there was a point for many, many years where a kid could not even take an official visit to SMU unless he was qualified under SMU standards. Not NCAA standards,
right,
but SMU standards. And so when you have that working against you, that really cuts the athletic pool down quite a bit.
Boy, no kidding. And you mentioned the lifting of the limits on texting and all the different contacts that a coach can have with the kid now. And we've talked about this earlier this week. But what do you make of that? Is that a good thing? I mean, it looks like it's just going to inundate the kid.
Well, I'm going to say yes. Bravo to the NCAA, because let's face it, the NCAA has been way behind. It cannot keep up with the amount of changes, the rapid changes that are going on in social media with the texting, the cell phones, the Instagram, the Facebook. I mean, it's just deregulate, get it out there, and let them do it, and let them deal with it. I mean, again, this all goes back to free will, where the kid can answer the calls when he wants to. He doesn't have to. He can call a coach back when he wants to, and if he's really interested in the program, after initially talking to a coach, he can decide who he wants to keep talking with. And if a coach keeps hounding him from a program that the kid's not interested in, sooner or later that coach is going to probably get the hint that, okay, he's not interested in us, so we need to move on to recruit number two.
Try Plan B.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's something that
it needed to be done. It was already going on anyway. Where you've read stories, if you read, if you get on any of the websites, the recruiting websites, whether it be Rivals or Scout or whatever, where kids are saying, "Yeah, Coach so and so, got on Facebook with me and asked me to call him," and so that's exactly how these coaches skirted around this stuff. And so the NCAA, as far behind as it was, just said, "Forget it. We're just going to throw it open and let them talk to it, and it'll kind of sort itself out." Because it actually makes it easier for the coaches, too, for instance, because if a recruit calls a coach, that coach doesn't necessarily have to answer the phone right away. He can let it go to his voicemail, and if he's having dinner with his family, he can have dinner with his family and not feel stressed about taking the call and putting the family on hold. And then after he's done eating and he gets a moment to settle in, then he can call the kid back and talk to him about whatever it is they're going to talk about. So I think it will work out over time. I can say this, as I mentioned, this all started working with the basketball coaches last summer it became effective. And the early indication I've had from talking to a couple athletic directors is that they feel like the coaches feel relieved that this has come to play.
It's almost unenforceable anyway, so it's better just to eliminate it and make things much simpler to deal with.
It's a compliance nightmare too.
Yeah.
And so it's just, there's so much paper push and documentation that you have to do on something like that. And when this takes effect, I believe August 1st, when it takes effect, you're going to see a lot of compliance offices across the country singing hallelujah when that's over.
All right. Kevin, great talking to you as always, buddy. Hope you have a great weekend.
You do the same, Bryan. Thanks.
All right. Big 12 insider Kevin Lonnquist from Rattle and Hum Sports on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM.